Today is the second Sunday of Advent. And it is the day, of course, when we traditionally light the candle of peace. And that's, of course, why it is so fitting that we should read that passage this morning from the book of the prophet Isaiah. The passage that outlines this incredible vision of a world of peace. The wolf shall live with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid. The calf and the lion shall feed together, and a little child will lead them. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put its hand on the adder's den. They will not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain. I mean, think about what that is saying. You know, when we often talk about peace, our focus is usually on ending human conflict. It's all about negotiating a ceasefire or a peace treaty between, combatants like Russia and Ukraine. We talk about settling labor strife by negotiating an end to strikes or job actions. On a personal level, when we talk about peace, we think of it in terms of eliminating conflicts from our life. When no one is arguing, no one's upsetting anyone else, when everyone appears to be getting along, we call that what? We call it peace. But how interesting to see the vision of peace that we get in this Bible passage and how it goes so much further. The peace that is found in the human sphere apparently overflows from humanity to infect the whole of creation. And so we see natural enemies like wolves and lambs and leopards and kids lying in safety. And we see this long-standing enmity between legless reptiles and humanity set aside. And it is suddenly safe for children to play with poisonous animals without fear. This is saying something truly powerful. It's saying that peace is about more than human concerns, more than stopping human conflict. It is about the healing and the wholeness of the whole of creation. You may have heard that the Hebrew word for peace is shalom. What you may not know is that shalom doesn't just mean that there are no hostilities. Shalom comes from a Hebrew root that refers to peace, yes, but also to harmony, to wholeness, completeness, prosperity, welfare, and tranquility. It means all of that. Shalom is what happens when the whole universe comes together to find meaning and purpose and completeness. And isn't that the kind of peace we need in our world today? There are so many kinds of conflict raging in this world today. There is war in Ukraine. There are riots and dissent in Iran and China. Labor battles here in Canada. And there's also so much tension over issues like the environment or the wealth gap and many more. On a personal level, I know lots of people are dealing with enormous stresses in their lives that makes things feel anything but peaceful. So isn't it time to create that kind of peace? The peace that heals the whole world. Unfortunately, in our reading this morning, Isaiah tells us how that ideal state of peace can be established. It starts out apparently with a shoot. A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of its roots. Now, Jesse is, of course, the name of the father of King David. And if there's a shoot growing out of the stump of Jesse, that means, first of all, that somehow the house of David has apparently gone through hard times. It has been cut off like a tree in some sense. Now, it's hard to know exactly what that is meant to refer to. I assume that the prophet has, for some reason, been rather disappointed with the kings in the house of David. And he gives this prophecy. He feels as if the main tree of David's line has, in some sense, been cut down. And this new shoot, this new and different kind of king, is about to burst out of the wreck of the royal line of David. And when this ruler comes, Isaiah promises he will bring about a reign of peace, as described in this passage. So who is this shoot of Jesse? Christian readers will no doubt say that it is a clear reference to Jesus, the Christ. That may not be who the prophet, I'm pretty sure that's not who the prophet was initially thinking he was talking about. He was probably hopeful that such a child might actually be born to the house of David in his own day. He imagined a new king coming in his contemporary time. But there is something about this figure of the shoot of Jesse that transcends expectations we might have of any ordinary political figure and what they might accomplish. So it is not surprising at all that this passage should become associated with the idea of a coming Messiah. So that is how this shoot, who will accomplish peace, is described. And perhaps a more important question is, well, how will he do that? How will he accomplish such peace? And let me tell you how we often assume that peace is made. As I've already said, we often work under a definition of peace that sees it above all as a lack of conflict in initial affairs, in international affairs. For example, this lack of conflict is often achieved by placating, in some sense, the powerful actors of the world. For example, after Russia first invaded Ukraine in 2014, you might say that a certain peace was achieved when Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula. The powerful, belligerent Russia had been placated with this territory. There were no more open hostilities between Russia and Ukraine for many years. That's what we often call peace in this world. But you might well see here the problems with that definition of peacemaking. One of the biggest being, obviously, that peace did not last. And this year, Russia came back, looking for more territory, initially seeking to annex the whole of Ukraine and bringing Europe and the world closer to the precipice of open war. So was that original armistice of 2014 really peace? I don't think so. But it's often the only kind of peace we feel we can hope for in this world. And this is not just true in international matters. This is something we often do in our personal lives as well. We operate under this idea that peace is a lack of conflict. And so many of us dedicate ourselves to avoiding conflict in our lives at all costs. But avoiding conflict is not the same thing as embracing peace. I mean, I catch myself doing it. I bet you do too. When you know that a certain topic is going to lead to an argument, what do? You avoid the topic. You avoid the conflict. If you see someone you know has a complaint or is upset with you, what do? You avoid talking to them. When things get heated on some subject, what do? You change the subject. Or maybe you leave the room. These are all methods for avoiding conflict. Sometimes, yeah, sure, they might be useful strategies, but never make the mistake of thinking that when you're doing that, you are creating genuine peace. Look instead to the example of the shoot of Jesse and what he does. What he does to bring about the extraordinary peace that is described in this passage. This is how he does it. His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide by what his ears hear. This is, of course, the classic image of blind justice. As you know, the common image for justice, even today, is of a woman holding up scales and wearing a blindfold. This powerful image means that justice must always be administered in a way that is fair. She wears a blindfold so that she will not be influenced by things like race and wealth and power or standing of the people who come before her. If she were to look at such things, well, then obviously she would decide in favor of the powerful and important. But instead, she must decide what is right, and so she is blinded. Whatever we are oriented towards a peace that is merely a lack of conflict, that, my friends, is exactly what we do not do. Because you know what? The easiest way to avoid conflict is usually to allow the powerful, or at least the noisy people, get away with what they want. But the shoot of Jesse does not look at any of that, and so administers a justice that is untainted. Equal justice, therefore, is absolutely essential to the creation of a true and lasting peace. But that is not the whole story. The shoot of Jesse goes even further than administering equal justice, because Isaiah goes on to say, "But with righteousness he shall judge for the poor and decide with equity for the oppressed of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill all the wicked." Now this suggests more than equal blind justice, because we are told that the shoot judges for the poor, decides for the oppressed. He also takes into account the wickedness of those who come before him for judgment, not just the case that they present. On one level, this would appear to be a contradiction against the idea of blind justice that has just been described. The shoot of Jesse appears to be playing favorites, right? He is favoring the poor, favoring the oppressed. But what is being suggested here is actually a commitment, a deeper commitment to equal justice. It is a recognition that if there are those who are poor or oppressed, it is often because there are invisible forces working against them. It recognizes that there are structures within society that keep people in poverty, no matter how hard they may work. It recognizes that there are such things as subtle racism or sexism or other prejudices at work that keep people in situations where they are oppressed and prevent it from flourishing. And so it suggests a justice that seeks to redress those larger underlying issues. And obviously, really obviously, it can be difficult to strike a balance between dispensing equal justice for all and seeking to address the structural injustices that might be bigger than the individual cases that come up. I don't think any nation has really managed to get that balance right. But Isaiah suggests that the shoot of Jesse does. He refers to the blindness of justice first, so that suggests to me that we must strive for that equal justice first. And yet the priority is still also to find ways to create justice for the poor and for the oppressed. So we need to make that effort to create a system that balances all of these things. And obviously that's something that we've got to put a lot of work into. But the overall principle at stake is this, and must not be missed. This passage is about the creation of a justice that leads to peace in this world. And this is the kind of justice that leads to true peace. And yes, I know that the ultimate peace that is described in this passage will elude humanity, at least until Christ may come. But that should not prevent us from getting as close to that peace as we humanly can. The message of this passage is clear. If we aspire to achieve such peace, we cannot settle that by avoiding conflict. We need to look for justice first. And conflict is sometimes unavoidable if we do what is right. It will be inevitable, for example, when you stand up for somebody because they are in a minority or because they are marginalized. You will enter into conflict of some sort if you resist someone who is determined to exploit or oppress others. And I know when you do that, that's not going to feel peaceful. But making sure what is right and just is done will feel like the opposite of peace. It will feel like conflict. But remember what the goal is. The goal is not to avoid conflict. The goal is to create shalom. And shalom includes harmony, wholeness, completeness, prosperity, welfare, and tranquility for the whole universe. None of that can happen without justice and fairness for all, including the poor, including the oppressed. And that is something well worth struggling for. Lord, grant your shalom for a world sorely in need of it. Amen.